Hey everyone, this is Reading Time with Pickle. I know I have not released too many videos recently, which I apologize for, but today I have a real quick book review for you for a horror novel titled The Ghost Tree. I'm not going to be reading this book out loud. I have already read it. I actually picked it up four or so days ago, a few days ago. I was on a whim, just visited a bookstore and, was just puttering about, looking at all the books, and this one really caught my attention. Not because of the artwork or the summary or, the praise that it's gotten on the front and the back cover, but just the title, The Ghost Tree. Somewhat, or somehow rather, resonated with me. So I decided to pick it up. I read it in 2 days. It's over 400 pages long. Read it in 2 days. And while the story is still fresh in my mind, while my opinions are still fresh in my mind, I just wanted to talk about it. And I'm going to give you guys 2 disclaimers before I get into this book review. Disclaimer number 1, I will be talking about spoilers. I will try to be mindful, and if I'm going to talk about a spoiler, I will remind everyone again, I'm going to talk about a spoiler now, but I might forget, or I might accidentally, let something slip. So if you're planning on reading this book, and you don't want to be spoiled about anything, farewell. See you later. If that's okay with you, then let's carry on. Disclaimer number 2. I don't usually do book reviews, so I have no script, I have no outline. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here. So there's not going to be anything fancy like skip to chapter 2 if you want to hear about this, or skip ahead to skip this spoiler, or there's nothing like that. It's just going to be summary, pros and cons. I'll alternate between what I liked and what I didn't like, what I thought were some strengths or weaknesses, what I thought was done well, what could be done better. I'll alternate between those to keep it fair. And then we'll conclude with whether or not I thought this was a good horror novel and whether or not I would recommend it and how much I would recommend it. Alright, so let's get started. Let's start with the author's summary of the novel. It states, here it is, when the bodies of 2 girls are found torn apart in the town of Smith's Hollow, Lauren is surprised, but she also expects that the police won't catch the killer. After all, her father's body was discovered the year before with his heart missing, and since then everyone has moved on. Even her best friend Miranda has become more interested in boys than in spending time at the old ghost tree, the way they used to when they were kids. So when Lauren has a vision of a monster dragging the remains of the girls through the woods, she knows she needs to do something to help, unlike the rest of Smith's Hollow. But as she draws closer to answers, she realizes that the foundation of her seemingly normal town might be rotten, and that if nobody else stands for the missing, she will. So that is Miss Christina Henry's summary. Let's get into my quick summary of this novel. So, this is a horror novel. More specifically, this is a monster story. There is a monster in this town killing people. And there is a lot of body horror in this story. So if you're not into reading about teenagers getting diced up, getting eviscerated, getting beheaded, having lumps of their body parts dumped into people's lawns, this story's not for you. Or it might be, and I'll talk about later why it might be. But the point is, there's a lot of body horror. A lot of people are dying in this book. It's a monster story, a lot of body horror. But it's also a mystery. We're trying to figure out, the first half of this book, we're trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this town. And it almost seemed, the first thing that that this town reminded me of was Stephen King's It, where everyone seems to be under a spell. No one seems to be, make a big deal out of these people dying. It just seems like they're all forgetting. So what the hell is going on in this town? It's a mystery. It's really, at its core, I would say it's a mystery thriller wearing the skin of horror. It's a better mystery story than it is a horror story. So even if you don't like body horror that much, if you like mystery thrillers, you might like this one. The second part of the book, or second half of the book, I would say, after we've got a hold on, what's going on in this town, it comes down to, how do we stop it? This novel, again, to give a rough summary, follows a chosen one trope. So the main character, her name is Lauren. She is the chosen one. There is something special about Lauren, and she doesn't know it for a long part of the novel. But once she learns it, then she realizes it's up to her to stop the monster. And really, things are set into motion. It's mentioned in the author's summary when Lauren's father was killed and her heart was carved out. That's when, I guess that was the impetus for the main characters to start their investigation, or to really, how do I explain this? The underlying motive for Lauren, at least for Lauren, is to figure out who killed her father. The story really kicks into gear. The call to action is when two teenage girls, their bodies are found dumped on this old grandma racist lawn. And that's when the police get involved. That's when Lauren hears about it. And that's when the story really starts to pick up. That's a brief summary. Weird things happening. Monster lurking in the woods. People getting diced up. Body parts flung around. Dumped into people's lawns. Mystery about mystery about what's going on, how to stop it. That's the story. Now let's get into specifics about what was done well, what was not done so well. And I'll talk a bit more about the story as well as I talk about these. What was done well? I think the first thing, really the biggest strength of this novel, is it's written very, very well. Again, this is slightly over 400 pages. The text isn't gigantic. It's, regular sized text. I finished it in 2 days. Paul Tremblay, this is on the front cover. This is some praise. Paul Tremblay is another horror author. I read one, I feel so guilty, I can't remember the title, but it was about a possession. It was quite a while ago. But he's also a horror author, and he states that it's a true page-turner, unflinching in presenting its supernatural and everyday horrors. I'll read that again. A true page-turner, unflinching in presenting its supernatural and everyday horrors. What I will say, I have two things to say about Paul Tremblay's statement. It is a true page-turner. This book reads very well. The prose is good. It's written very, very well. It's easy to read. It's just easy to burn through these pages. And the thing is, it doesn't rely on cheap cliffhangers, what's the best example? Alright, the easiest example I can think of is anyone read Goosebumps when they were a kid, or when they're a teenager, or even as an adult? That is a good series. I love that series. But the one thing that R.L. Stine does in Goosebumps is, at the end of every chapter, he puts in a cliffhanger, and it's so obvious. Like you're finishing a chapter, and the last sentence is, and then the hand came out of the darkness and grabbed her throat. Or, and then she opened the door and screamed. And those sentences are there at the end just to get you to keep reading it. Fair enough, I'm not going to comment on that tactic. There's none of that in this novel, and it still gets you to keep reading. I will be honest, I'm pretty harsh when it comes to reading books. Maybe some of you have noticed, maybe some haven't. Or if I don't like a book, I shelve it. I don't even finish it. I have no loyalty or feel no duty to finishing books that I start. Literally, the moment that I think things are getting boring, I shelve it. That did not happen with this novel. On the contrary, I literally finished it in 2 days. I think what it does well in that regard is the plot points are paced well, where again, it's a mystery. We want to know what's happening, and she uses, Christina uses multiple point of views in her narrative well, where she will, through the use of multiple POV, through multiple characters, she'll give you breadcrumbs about what's happening. And as a reader, we see from different people's perspectives different weird things that are going on in this town. And it's just like it's like a slow dose of getting interesting plot points, and it never really gets boring. I think that was a great strength. I think she was a great writer, and I don't say that for a lot of authors. She also does, as I mentioned, multiple POVs very well, where I think one of the biggest criticisms or biggest risks associated with multiple POVs is that it can be hard to keep track of. And sometimes it's like, who cares? We don't care about this character. I'm just going to skip him. Or even having too many POVs, you're taking attention away from the protagonist, so it becomes harder to really connect with any single character. Or story becomes confusing. Those are a lot of criticisms, but she does not fall into any of those traps. Her multiple POVs, as I mentioned, have the purpose of providing perspective to readers. You don't have to care about a lot of these characters, and that's a weakness too. I'm going to get into that. But you don't have to care so deeply about a lot of these characters, but they're interesting enough for you to remember. And what happens with them is interesting enough to give you more perspective about the story and want to keep reading. But on the flip side, let's talk about the characters. I think one of the biggest weaknesses is that you don't care for a lot of these characters, and even worse, a lot of them just seem like props. Like they're there to fulfill a mission, to fulfill a plot point, or give you some info dump. That's their entire purpose, and it becomes blatantly obvious with some characters. So before I get into the side, and this is mainly an issue with a lot of the side characters, so it's not egregious, but before I get into that issue, let's talk about the characters. So we have two main characters, as mentioned. One, the first, I would say this is the true protagonist of the series, or of the book. Her name is Lauren. She's a teenager. She's 14 years old. I think her character was written well. She has a younger brother who's about 4 years old. She has an older mother. She has a mother who's like, 35, 36 years old. and that's her family. Her father died last year, mysteriously. Heart was carved out by the ghost tree. And Lauren has a lot of real interactions and a lot of real connection with her immediate family. And she is, for the most part, very likable as a main character. She's a great older sister to her younger brother. She has a tenuous or combative relationship with her mother, Karen. Her mother is constantly nagging her. And, Lauren's a teenager, so Lauren's can be kind of a brat, but it's very believable. And the tension that the mother and daughter have, it's deep because a lot of it is rooted in the father's death, where Lauren believes that her mother doesn't really care about her father's death and might even be happy about it. And that kind of gets into some of the weirdness going on in the town overall, not just with Lauren's mother, but everyone in the town. These deaths don't seem to really stick with people or resonate with them. But these interactions that Lauren has with her immediate family, it's very rich. And as a main character, we can really connect with her. But this story also has a deuteragonist, a secondary main character. His name is Alejandro, aka Alex. That's his nickname. And he is a police officer who recently moved to the town of Smith's Hollow with his wife, his child, his sister-in-law and her husband and their children. So they're kind of like a family unit that moved to the town together. And he's only been in this town for maybe 2 or 3 months, so he very quickly notices the weirdness that everyone seems to just be okay with, or the weirdness that doesn't really register with others. For example, when the 2 girls, it's mentioned in the back cover summary here, they're basically dismembered, eviscerated, dumped on an old racist grandma's lawn, and everyone seems to just forget or be like, oh yeah, that happened anyways. And what's really interesting about these 2 characters, or what's really well done about this book, is you have 2 protagonists who are both investigating the same thing because they have independent motives. They have independent motives for investigating the same thing, which are these disappearances or murders, and they don't share the spotlight. They're just doing their own thing for most, I would say 95% of the book. Lauren, as a teenager, who is, again, the chosen one, is doing what she can with her own resources to look into these murders. Alex, who is a police officer, who has more different resources than Lauren, is also doing his own thing, looking into these murders. They don't overlap until the very end. And both of their stories are interesting, and again, it provides perspective. It gives the readers more information to work with. And again, very well done throughout the entire book. My biggest gripe with this book is the end. What is it? Man, jeez. I burned through this book, and I got to... Yeah, I got to the last... What is this? 33, 36... I got to the last 4 chapters. And it just fell apart. Last 4 chapters, or 36 chapters, so last 10% of the book just fell apart. Where you have this mystery that these 2 protagonists are working to solve, and they're independently getting closer and closer, and occasionally their stories will overlap, and when it does, they get so much more information. But they don't really notice, for the most part, that they're both investigating this, that they both want to keep it hidden for their own reasons. But you get to the end where finally the two main characters, in a sense, quote unquote, team up, or at least their stories collide, their motives collide, and it just falls apart. Because the monster, the mystery's good. The mystery's really good. The monster, the horror part, not so much. The monster is not scary. And I'm going to get into some spoilers here. I told you I would be mindful about this. So here are the spoilers. The monster is the most stereotypical, boring villain ever. There are two antagonists. One is like your stereotypical, needs to do whatever to keep the monster happy, kind of, almost like an acolyte, unwitting acolyte. And the other is just the monster. And they're both bad because they both give villain speeches. Like, could you not give a villain speech? Monster, sure, like maybe the crazy old acolyte, and I'm trying not to spoil too much, so I won't say like who it is, but could you, maybe that guy can give a villain speech, but monster, can you not give a villain speech? Just do your thing. You're literally a monster. Just do your thing. And the monster was felled so easily. It was like, here, chosen one, here's your silver bullet. Oh, I'm confronted by the monster. I remember, I'm the chosen one. I have a silver bullet. Let me fire it at the monster. Monster is dead. That's literally how the story ends. It's the weakest part. There's so much good in the first 95% of this novel that just falls flat on its face in the end. And I would have dropped it. Chapter 33 of 36, I would have dropped it. But I was so close to the end that I sped through it because I knew it was, man, I was so disappointed. I just wanted to be done with it when I started reading the last 4 chapters. That's the biggest gripe for me. The end, it was so good until the end, and the end just kind of falls flat on its face. Another, and I was talking about Lauren, is a rich character. She has a lot of good connections or emotional ties with her immediate family, such as her little brother and mother, but many of these characters, and I'm going to sound pretty harsh saying this, many of these characters are treated as if they were props. They either exist to provide information to the reader or to push the plot along. Now I'm going to give you a few examples, okay? And here's more spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, because I'm getting into the specifics, I'm going to give you names. So if you don't want to hear this, goodbye, farewell. Don't blame me at all. Okay, let's start. Karen, Lauren's mother, is a great character. Fantastic character. This woman seems like such a bitch, but when you first start reading about her, like, I could not stand her. And I don't like to buy into the Karen meme, because that's kind of like hurtful to people. I know plenty of nice Karens, right? That's kind of hurtful. And people can't choose their own names, and someone's name should not define them. So I hate it, but Karen was acting like a Karen at surface level when you read. But the more you read about Karen, the more depth there is to her, is why she's acting like such a bitch. That was an example of a great character who had some growth and had some development and who you got insight on. But the rest of these characters, aside from Lauren and Karen, not so much. For example, the Lauren's younger brother. He's like 4 years old. His name's David. He literally exists to give out plot points. I'm sorry, but it's like the most worn out excuse ever, where this kid is a seer, or what do you call those people that can see into the future? A diviner. I'm not sure what the right title is, but this kid can see into the future, and he knows what's happening when it's connected to this monster, at least. He's psychic in that way. But he just exists to give out plot points, to tell Lauren what's going on, where she should go next. It's the laziest shit. Excuse my language. It's the laziest character I've ever... One of the laziest characters. Oh man, I can't... Just thinking about him makes me laugh. One of the laziest characters I've read. He's a nice kid. I like his personality, but he exists... His literal purpose in the entire novel, his function in the novel, he has zero character development. He interacts with like no one other than Lauren. He has no like meaningful interactions. He's just there to be like, oh, hey, this is happening. Be careful, because this just happened. Terrible. He's a prop. Who else? Let's see. There's a police officer. Okay. Let's talk about, there is kind of a red herring. Again, it's kind of like a mystery. So you're trying to like figure out what the monster is, or even who the monster is. And there's a red herring. There are two characters. One, I think his name was Jake. And this is like how I think not great these characters were, is that literally, like, I finished this yesterday and I can't even remember what their names were. Yeah, Jake and Officer Henrik. So they're two characters, right? Jake and Officer Henrik. And for the novel, okay, let's start with Henrik, and I'll get into the problem here. I know I'm messing this up, and I apologize. So Officer Henrik is a nice police officer. He's always kind to Lauren. He goes out of his way to talk with her and makes her feel safe. And he's just a friendly, good guy. Lauren has a crush on him, right? But the problem with Officer Henrik is he has such little to do in this novel. All we get about him is Lauren likes him. Lauren has a crush on him. He's a nice guy. He's a handsome guy. Time and time again, we'll see him doing something. I think at one point, he was driving by in his cruiser and he didn't stop to speak with Lauren, which was weird for her because he's usually a friendly guy, stops to chat, and he ignored her, made her feel weird. Another time she's going to her grandma's house, he stops to talk with her. Another time he's talking with Lauren's mom and Lauren gets jealous. Those are the only things we know him for. And it's so obvious that this guy is put on the sideline. And I'm going to tell you why he's put on the sideline and why it's obvious. Soon. I'm going to tell you that soon. Then we have this other character named Jake. Jake is Lauren's love interest. He's like an 18-year-old. And that's another weird thing about this novel I'll get into later. There's a lot of like minors dating adults or doing things with adults. I'll get into that later, but that was really weird for me. But anyways, there's this character named Jake. He's Lauren's love interest. Lauren is 14. He is 18. But he is her love interest. And the novel, just how the novel is written, how the story, how the chapters are laid out, the novel makes you believe, it never outright says it, but it makes you believe that Jake is the monster. Jake is so attentive to Laura, he's such a nice guy. But then there's one scene where he drives Laura's best friend Miranda home. And the very next chapter, you have a scene where it's implied that he goes looking for Miranda and wants to hook up with Miranda. It never says Jake, though. It's very sneaky in that regard. Again, huge spoilers. I'm so sorry. Huge spoilers. I warned you. But anyways, the novel makes you believe that Jake is the monster. But it's sneaky because it never says, when Miranda talks about her secret lover, which the reader is supposed to assume is Jake, she never calls him by his name. She never says Jake. Miranda always refers to her secret lover as him or he. Now, you're led to believe it's Jake, but reading this novel it becomes obvious, like, no, it's not Jake. It can't be Jake, because the novel's trying so hard to make you think it's Jake. Like, it's just so obvious. It's trying so hard to make you think it's Jake. So who could it be? Who would Lauren be upset about Miranda hooking up with that's not Jake? Officer Henrik, who's purposefully sidelined so we don't think about him too much. And again, kind of weird that this, how old is he? Like 28, 29-year-olds banging a 14-year-old? That's weird as fuck, excuse my language. But it's in the story, and he's a monster, so I guess since he's a monster, it's not real. But anyways, that happened. So if you're not into that, not into that kind of thing, don't read this. No one should be into that kind of thing. Disclaimer, just to make it clear. But if you don't want anything to do, even in a fictional story, even with a monster who's possessing a 28-year-old, hooking up with a 14-year-old, drop this book. It was so weird. Anyways. Oh, geez. That to say, these two characters are props. Jake is Lauren's boyfriend, who you're supposed to think is a monster. He doesn't do anything significant. He just tags along with Lauren, says he likes her. The reader's tricked or nudged in the direction of thinking he's trying to butter her up and get close to her just to kill her. But it becomes so obvious that Officer Heinrich has been purposefully sidelined, and that he's the real killer. And Officer Henrik, he doesn't do anything for the whole novel. Like, he's just like patrolling around until the very end, that last 5% of the novel, when it really falls flat, until he's the monster. He's just Officer Henrik until he's the monster. There's no interesting or meaningful interactions with him because the story is so scared that you're going to figure out he's the monster. Alright, so we've talked about Jake is a prop, Henrik is a prop, and the reason why I think this novel isn't scary, and I'm just realizing this now, this was not a scary horror novel. It was for the most part, a good mystery novel. It was not a scary horror novel, even with the body horror. Why was this novel not scary? There are people dying, literally being chopped up, eviscerated. So why was it not scary? Because you don't care about the characters. You don't care about who dies. It means nothing. And I'm going to give you the most egregious example of this, and there's a huge spoiler, okay? Miranda. Let's talk about Miranda. Miranda is Lauren's best friend. I think it's even introduced. This is technically the first page of the story, second page. Okay. It's introduced so early on in the story. Lauren and Miranda always met under the ghost tree. They'd done so since they were very small, for so long that Lauren couldn't remember who thought of the idea first. One of them would call the other on the telephone and say, "Meet me by the old ghost tree," and they would both go. It lays it out very early in the book, literally second page of the story, how close Lauren and Miranda were. And one of the major conflicts in this story is that Lauren and Miranda they're growing up. They're both teenagers. They're developing their own interests. And Lauren is starting to feel resentful of Miranda. The novel it constantly reminds the reader, Miranda used to be so nice. And Lauren used to have such a strong bond. But now they've changed. And Miranda's just a bitch. Like, she's an asshole. She's so mean to Lauren. And that's fine. People change. And it's okay for a character to be a jerk. But the problem is, there's nothing more to Miranda's character. For the most part. She's just a boy-crazy teenager who treats her best friend like she's still a child. Who looks down on her best friend. She's a bitch. She's an asshole. That's her entire thing. There's literally nothing more to Miranda than trying to bang people and being an asshole to Lauren. Now, the problem here is that Miranda dies. Miranda's killed at the end, very end, killed by the monster. And Lauren feels so guilty. And she's, just not completely broken, but she's broken over it. Because Lauren and Miranda had just had a fight the night before. And I can understand why Lauren would be sad that Miranda died. Because she has, 14 years worth of friendship with Miranda. And even if Miranda was a total jerk to her this past year, those other 13 years still meant something to Lauren. I understand that. But as a reader, I didn't care. Because we never saw that connection with Lauren and Miranda. It was never sprinkled throughout the book that, okay, Lauren and Miranda, they're going their separate ways, but there's still times when Miranda shows that she cares about Lauren. There was zero. Miranda's just a bitch, and you can't empathize with her at all. There is one point where I thought that the book would really go into the fact that Miranda wasn't as much of an asshole as she was, where she sees Lauren and Jake, which is a love interest that you're made to believe is a monster, exit the woods together, and Miranda feels jealous and she feels lonely, and she thinks to herself, please, Lauren, don't leave me. And that was really powerful. And you have some scenes with Miranda looking at herself in the mirror and calling herself a slut because Lauren called her a slut, and you feel bad for her. But that's it. I think so much more weight could have been put on Miranda's death if she would have shown a little bit more insecurity, even in the narration in her own mind, little more effort to realize that maybe she was treating Lauren poorly, maybe show some care for Lauren, and still have some remnants or dregs of friendship there. Even though they're going their separate ways, they were friends and there's still something there. There's nothing like that for the reader to hold on to. And there are no stakes to people dying. That's the thing. There are no stakes here. Who cares about Miranda dying? Okay, here's another big spoiler, right? Lauren's grandma is killed by... Alright, I'm spoiling it. Lauren's grandma is killed by the mayor because the mayor wants to keep the monster in check and thinks that Lauren's grandma can help with that because Lauren's grandma is also, quote-unquote, the chosen one. But you don't care. You meet Lauren's grandma once. And Lauren's grandma, her literal purpose was an info dump to tell you a story about why Lauren is the chosen one. That's her entire purpose in the novel. She's literally there to give you information. And when she dies, we don't care. And those were the two biggest deaths in the entire book. And there were there was zero weight behind them because these characters are so one note. They're just props. It's like if someone snapped a broom in half, or if someone threw their old sneakers in the dumpster. Who cares? That's, I think, one of the biggest flaws in this novel is, sure, some characters are very deep and their relationships are great. Lauren is great. Karen, Lauren's mom, is great. Even Alex as a protagonist, he's just kind of going through the motions kind of character, you know. He worries that the old grandma neighbor's a racist, which she is. He's worried about his sister-in-law's job at the canning factory. But for the most part, he's not a deep character. He's just a good guy, good police officer doing his thing. The characters were weak. Let's end it positively. What's another strength? Because that's really all the negatives that I have to say about this book is the last 5%, last 4 chapters are just so bad. And aside from Lauren and Karen, I think most of the characters are just props and does a bad job making them, the novel or the story doesn't do a great job making them feel alive. Prose, excellent writing, really great writing, excellent pacing. As a mystery story, great. Great use of POVs. Some character interactions and some characters were very deep. So let's end it on a positive. What's another good thing about this book? Let me try to remember. I don't know, I might just send it there. It was well written. Maybe not the characters, but at least the story, the pacing, it was good. Would I recommend it? Depends. If you like character-driven stories, no, I would not. If you don't mind, if you like a good mystery or thriller and don't mind some superficiality with characters, yeah, it's good. It's a good read. It's not bad. Again, I finished this book in 2 days. It was a good read. Yeah, I would recommend it. It's a good read. Out of 5 stars. Is this a good horror novel? It is a good mystery novel. Is it a good horror novel? No, it's not scary. It is a mystery novel wearing the skin of a horror novel. Would I recommend it regardless? Yes. It's a good book. It might not be the best horror story, but it's still a good book. It's better written than a lot of books out there. Out of 5 stars, I'll give it like 2.5 to 3. 3 stars. Let's give it 3 stars. Out of a grade, letter grade. From A to B, we're not doing tiers, we're doing letter grades. I will give it a B-. Not bad. Not great, but not bad. Yeah, and that was the review of The Ghost Tree. Thanks for hanging around and reading or listening to me. See ya. Bye-bye.